In this video, I'm going to explain one reason why languages change over time and sometimes gain some weird irregularities. And that's our physical bodies. Language is not all abstract, and writing is a tool. It's a sketch of a map, not the actual territory. While we do have a sort of mental object we can think of as language, most instances of it throughout history are instantiated with our physical bodies. Most of humanity, for most of human history, didn't have writing. Most languages in the world right now are not written. I didn't always want to be a linguist. I grew up traveling and I got into learning languages to better understand different cultures and people, and to seek out new worlds and new civilizations. I worked in sales for a big software company while trying to make it as a jazz musician in Manhattan, and it wasn't until I was introduced to a hyper-polyglot bassist that I ever thought about linguistics. He told me it's basically like seeing the Matrix, and that if I wanted to learn languages faster and more effectively, I needed to read an intro to linguistics. And boy was he right. Once you learn how things actually work, the world looks completely different. So today I'm going to talk about one piece of that. I'm going to take the problem of language change and explain one driver of it: our mouths. Just big old meat tubes with some holes coming out of it and a slab of slobbery muscle flopping in the middle. I have to stop watching Physics Duck before my channel starts to sound too much like him. Want to see something cool? If you're new to the channel, I'm Dr. Taylor Jones. I have a PhD in linguistics from the University of Pennsylvania, and on the channel, I talk about linguistics, language learning, and all things language. This one's going to be a teensy bit more technical, but that's what drew most of you to my channel in the first place anyway. I'm Dr. Taylor Jones, and this is Language Jones. Today's video is brought to you by Babbel. To be honest with you, I'd been kind of sleeping on them for a little bit. But I started using Babbel a little while ago to dust off my German. Ich habe in Deutschland als Kind gelebt, but more realistically, I'm restarting from scratch, and I wanted to see how they teach. And they're pretty great. I'm supposed to tell you about how easy they are to use on your phone, and how they have excellent podcasts and clear lessons, and that they're one of the top language learning apps in the world, and that's all true.
Hi there. Let's practice ordering at a cafe. I'll start the conversation.
Hallo, was hätten Sie gerne?
Entschuldigung, ich verstehe nicht.
Kein Problem. Möchten Sie Kaffee?
Ja, ich möchte Kaffee.
Klein oder groß?
Groß bitte. But let me tell you what stood out to me as a linguist and what separates them from other apps you might be considering. First, they have vibrant, engaging photographs. You wouldn't think that would make as huge a difference as it does, but it really does. Second, they have grammatical and cultural explanations throughout, so you're learning more than to just translate set phrases. Third, the audio is fantastic and they have a variety of voices.
Mehr.
That makes a difference. And lastly, and this is kind of inside baseball, they have core material that they're trying to teach you. But they don't shy away from having a word here or there that's not the focus of the lesson, but that you learn incidental to it, as sort of a preview of that material before you get there, rather than exclusively limiting themselves to material that's already formally been introduced in previous lessons. This is much more like the actual real-world use case. The first one in German that jumped out at me was freute mich, which is now just stuck in my head. If I do make the trip that I'm planning, my entire goal is just to buy a German Schultasche for nostalgia's sake, and I'll definitely be able to do that pretty soon. Let me know in the comments which of these languages you're learning and if they have a distinctive backpack. If you think Babbel might be right for you, click on my link or scan the QR code to get 60% off your Babbel subscription. Now back to the video. There's a broader problem my advisor in grad school spent the better part of a career trying to understand. Why do languages change? And more specifically, he was interested in what's called the actuation problem. How does a change begin? We know that once there's multiple forms competing for the same niche, one may outcompete the other, or there may be stable variation, or just drift, including drift that runs to completion, meaning one goes away. As an aside, this is one of the things linguists do. So for those of you surprised by books like Mathematical Models of Social Evolution on my shelf, or Modeling Dynamical Systems, this is why I have those. And the evolutionary framework is actually really useful in linguistics, but in a sort of abstract way that's hard for people to wrap their heads around. It's like humans are carriers for linguistic entities, and some could be in competition in the same abstract psychological ecosystem that exists at the level of the mind, but it's the collective minds of an entire population of language speakers. It's pretty wild stuff that would probably make a good Star Trek episode. Anyway, This approach explains all sorts of things like the shift to using do support in English, where over about 500 years, you go from he saw not to he did not see. And I'm partial to using this approach to explain suppletion. That's where a verb has different stems instead of just the same stem across all tenses and moods and so on. That's go and went in English, where went is a form of a now obsolete other word. That's ir and fue and voy in Spanish, and aller and ire and ve in French. That's leagid and omer in Hebrew. It's a thing that just kind of happens across a lot of languages. My theory, which I never published a model of, but which I should probably get around to, is that once words are in the same semantic neighborhood, so to speak, and one or the other gets semantically bleached, that means loses some of its meaning, then they can potentially be thought to be competing for the same spot in a sentence. And it's other factors like person, whether you're talking to someone or about someone, and tense and aspect that affect the choice. Or maybe it's just randomness, but that random drift can run to completion in some parts of a verbal paradigm, without it having to be the whole paradigm. But enough of that. There's another driver of the actuation of language change. That's our mouths. And once the change is completed, we can lose the hint of why the change happened in the first place. Let me give an example. This one comes from Hebrew. Hebrew is a Semitic language and has what's sometimes referred to as a templatic morphology. That is, instead of having a word stem you add things to the beginning or the end of, you've got 3 consonants that do most of the heavy lifting in terms of meaning, and then fitting different vowels into templates gives you specific words. So the consonants L, M, and D tend to appear in that order in a lot of words related to learning. Lomed is I learn, melamed is I teach or a teacher, limud is learning, talmid is a student, and so on. Now, the infinitives of the most common class of verbs, that's verbs like to learn, basically always has an L as the prefix that indicates it's the infinitive, like to in English. And in most cases, the form of the word is something like lilmod, lisgor, linpol, and so on. It's actually a really simple system, whose simplicity is marred by a bajillion exceptions for all sorts of reasons. Instead of liptoch, patacha becomes liftoach. And what's particularly hard for learners first starting out is the fact that the vowel in the prefix changes. It's not lihov, it's le'ahov. It's not limod, it's la'amod. It's not livod, it's la'avod. So here's the crazy thing about these. This pattern is caused by a historical sound that's no longer consistently or frequently pronounced in contemporary Hebrew. That is, people used to say a sound, and that caused a change in the vowel, which I'll explain in just a moment. That sound went away, but the change is still there in the vowels. What do I mean? Well, let's start where it's still sometimes pronounced. Le'ahov has a glottal stop as the first consonant in the root. That's the sound in uh-oh or ba'al. That's a closure of the airflow at the glottis. That is a constriction at the back of the throat. The normal vowel in infinitives here is E. That's produced by getting the body of the tongue high in the mouth and close to the front of the mouth, with the lips unrounded. I promise I'll go back to my International Phonetic Alphabet series soon, by the way. But you have competing physiological goals here. You're moving the body of your tongue up and forward, but you're also making a constriction at the back of the throat next. And your throat bone's connected to your tongue bone. Anticipating that throat closey gesture, you literally pull your tongue slightly down because you're tugging on the root of your tongue. What's slightly down from E? If you know your IPA and anatomy, it's either E or something in that range. The ones like la'avod and la'amod used to be pronounced with ah, one of LanguageSim's favorite sounds next to uy. That's a voiced pharyngeal constriction, literally just squeezing the throat muscles and root of the tongue like you're so freaking hungry. And doing that while also saying E is very difficult. Go ahead and try it yourself. I'll wait. If you actually tried it, and I hope you did, you should immediately be able to feel how it's easier to say la'amod, because your tongue is being pulled into an ah sound. But now that sound is basically gone. Before it disappeared though, the word was la'amod for everybody, so of course it became la'amod. The same goes for the ch sound that used to be So even though ch is pronounced with the tongue high and back, because it used to be words that have that as the first root consonant still have ah, but words that were always pronounced with ch have the expected e, like lachshov to think and lichtov to write. This is not just a Hebrew thing, by the way. In fact, there's a recently described version of this that happens in some varieties of African American English, in what Charlie Farrington refers to as incomplete neutralization in his dissertation. In some varieties of Black English, T and D can sound the same, where both are pronounced either as T or as a glottal stop. Think period. In English, one of the main cues for determining whether a consonant in a syllable coda is voiced or unvoiced is actually not the voicing of the consonant, it's the length of the vowel that precedes it. This is weird, I'll give you a second to digest that. It's not how we think about things usually. But it's true, and you can verify it for yourself. The difference between bed and bet is actually more about how long my is. So what Farrington finds in his dissertation research is that people keep the vowel length even when they might distinguish between the two words as be and bet. This stuff happens all over the place. So as you're learning a new language, when you start seeing regular irregularities, it's sometimes worth recognizing that they may be the remnants of a historical pattern where over time the language has lost the original trigger for that pattern. It's like a phonological hint about the history of the language. And with the Hebrew example in particular, the original trigger was literally our anatomy. Now, a word of caution is important here. If there's one thing that is popular around the world, no matter what language you speak, it's claiming that people nowadays are ruining the language because they're lazy. And laziness is honestly kind of an accurate way of discussing what linguists call ease of articulation, but I would caution against thinking about it in those terms. We tend to want to communicate quickly and efficiently, and we have to do so by blowing air through meat. So physiological constraints really do make certain things easier, which means there are external, language external, physiological pressures on our language use. I've talked about fast speech forms and spoken reduction in a few other videos before, but I really want to hammer home that sometimes they're literally just because of how our mouths are built. This means that signed languages, for instance, are still subject to the same kinds of pressures, but the specific pressures are different. It's like how certain runs are really easy on the piano, but practically impossible on the guitar, and vice versa. I don't know about you, but recognizing that a seeming irregularity in a language that I'm studying can be explained by understanding how our mouths physically produce a sound from an earlier stage in the language's history, that's mind-blowing stuff for me. Hope it is for you too. If you like what I'm doing with the channel, please like and subscribe and leave me a comment. You can support me with super thanks or on patreon.com/languagejones. I've recently launched 2 other channels with my colleagues at CulturePoint, so be sure to check those out if you are interested in culture, communication, and conflict. Who isn't? Until next time, happy learning.